Hey everyone, welcome back to Portal of Wisdom. I'm back today with another story for you. So if you are new to the channel, like and subscribe and click that little post notification bell so you get alerted when we post new videos. And now on to today's topic. Today we are going to talk about the lost Golden Eagle mine in Death Valley. And this one comes out of, I believe, a 1940 article in Desert Magazine. Now, Desert Magazine in the early days had a lot of great stories since I believe Desert Magazine started about 1938. So a lot of these stories that had been circulating around for, a little while from the 1800s, or there's some even further back than that, but some of them had been circulating the 1800s, early 1900s, and a lot of this stuff ended up down in print shortly after that, which is great because if you're able to look back to articles and tell what the story is from back in those days, that's a phenomenal way to kind of cut to the chase a little bit closer to the story. And today's story is one of those that the 1940 article in Desert Magazine is not too far removed from when this story actually happened in 1902. So, anyhow, we will talk about this story. This happened in the summer of 1902. There was a prospector. His name was Alkali Jones, and he had been in the Skidoo, California area. This was a mining area in Death Valley, and there weren't many mining places really in Death Valley. Death Valley, California was very, very desolate, very dry, and anyhow, there were prospectors in these areas and only a couple of small towns at best. So this gentleman, Alkali Jones, he had been in the Death Valley, California area and trying his luck, and sounded like he wasn't having the best luck at this point, so he was going to make his way to Searchlight, Nevada. And Searchlight, Nevada was in the far southern tip of Nevada, south of where Las Vegas is today. Now, of course, Las Vegas was not there during these days. I believe Las Vegas kind of sprung up a little bit later with the building of the Hoover Dam and stuff like that. But anyhow, Searchlight, Nevada was on the Colorado River in the far southern point of Nevada, and it was a area, I believe there were gold and maybe silver mines there too. And so this was obviously a good spot to go if people are finding precious metals here. Then a lot of prospectors would make their way to those areas. And this is apparently what Alkali Jones was doing. He had been in the Death Valley area, wasn't really having a lot of luck, and decided, okay, what's another area to head to where maybe I can try my luck. Now, Searchlight might have also been one of the closest areas where there was a town and you have water because the Colorado River is coming through, and going west was not a very good option because the Sierra Nevadas are pretty tall. Mount Whitney is over 14,000 feet in that area, so this may have also been an easier place to get to. It's easier to go over some lower mountains than to try to climb over the Sierra Nevadas. So this is likely why he decided that he would head to Searchlight, Nevada, and try his luck there. The mountains were a little bit easier to get through heading out of Death Valley to the east, and that's the direction he was going to go. So I guess where he started off in Skidoo, California, in Death Valley is kind of in the middle of Death Valley, so he had the eastern half of Death Valley that he needed to go over, and of course it's very dry, desolate, hot, nothingness of desert. So anyhow, it's still definitely a challenge. And Alkali, he wanted to make good time and hightail it out of Death Valley and try to spend, as little time in Death Valley as possible. And since he wanted to make good time, he made sure that he would load up his pack animal and not pack his pack animal down too heavy. So Alkali Jones was carrying a frying pan, coffee pot, a few pounds of bacon, a few pounds of jerky, some sugar, salt, coffee, I believe another item called hardtack, which was, I guess, kind of like a biscuit-like food. And he had a 22 caliber rifle and probably some rounds of ammunition. And pretty much at this point, he was loaded down with less than 100 pounds of food and gear. Of course, he had his bedroll, and he had a 1 gallon canteen of water. Now, a gallon's not a whole lot for going across desolate Death Valley, especially in the summertime, and this was the summer of 1902. So 2 days after leaving Skidoo, he entered a small, narrow valley that was an offshoot of a larger valley he had been in, and here he encountered a really bad desert sandstorm or haboob. So these sandstorms are really crazy. These type of desert storms would be something that you may think about in like Saudi Arabia or the Sahara Desert or something like that, but they do happen here in the U.S. too, in the desert areas. They happen in California, in the desert areas, in Arizona, and they're pretty crazy how these desert haboobs or these desert windstorms can turn day into night. And anyhow, I'll have a video on here where we're showing you what it looks like from one in 2011 that swept through the Phoenix area here that we experienced a few years ago. It really shows you how fast it can come upon you and how quickly it can turn full daylight into near darkness. It's pretty crazy. So, and these storms rise thousands of feet into the clouds, and then they sweep across the horizon and engulf everything in its way. They're pretty crazy. So eventually daylight does return, but it's amazing how much sand is sucked up into the storm, causing near darkness. And if you're outside in this, you're going to have sand grains that are pelting you, and it's going to feel like a lot of little needles being driven into your skin from these relentless winds. And when Alkali Jones was in this storm, in this tight little valley, he had to look for some kind of cover, and he trudged through the sand, and he spotted a dark shadow or some dark shadows, and he made his way towards them, and eventually he saw that it was a small dark mesa, or at the bottom of the butte or mesa there was a cluster of large boulders, and they seemed to offer some sort of respite from the relentless winds. So he stopped there to rest, and he decided to make camp. So beside one of these monstrous boulders of granite, he probably unrolled his bedroll or tried to get some protection from the sand, maybe with his pack animal. So once the storm had finally passed and the sun was out again, Alkali Jones made his way up the side of this little mesa or this little butte. And he was around halfway up when he started to get a better view of the valley, but he was aiming to get to the top for the best possible view. But like I said, when he was halfway up, he was on the north side, and he paused to look around a little bit, and he saw a few pieces of milky-looking quartz that were scattered on the hillside. And so he picked a couple of these pieces up, and he struck them with his little pick that he kept by his side. And as he broke them open, they revealed some bright yellow strings of gold running through them. So Alkali was excited by this discovery, and he scanned the hillside to see if he could locate where they came from on the side of the butte. And once he found on the hillside an outcropping of white quartz about 3 feet wide in places, and it was said it was visible for about 1,000 feet and apparently going in a downward direction as it disappeared down into the desert sands at the base of this little butte. So the vein was surrounded by pink granite, it was said, and everywhere he broke open the vein, he saw free gold. Alkali Jones, he wanted to claim this location so that he could come back to it and have the claim here, no one else could mine it. So he got out his empty tobacco tin and a pencil and paper that he carried in a little pouch on his waist, and he proceeded to fill out a location notice. Then he built a small monument out of rock, and he placed this tobacco tin with his signed notice in it. He placed it on this little monument that he had constructed. As he did this, a very large bird flew over, and he was not quite sure if it was an eagle or golden eagle or California condor or whatever it was, but he took this as a sign and he named his find the Golden Eagle. At this point, he gathered up about 10 pounds of this gold quartz ore that he had broken from the hillside, and it was starting to get later in the day at this point, and he figured he should probably get going, and he headed for the higher mountains to the north, or kind of in a northerly direction at this point. So apparently he wanted to get to the mountains or up and over this next section of mountains. So after about a mile, he was at the foot of these mountains, and he proceeded to climb up a few thousand feet, and he sat down to rest, and he took a look at his map, and he thought it looked like he was in the Funeral Mountains. And at that point, he thought he may even be sitting on Coffin Mountain at this point as he was looking down into Death Valley. And at this time, he had taken a swig of his water, and he had realized he only had about a pint of water left, so this was very bad news. So as he sat there, he realized he needed to do something, but he first figured he needed to make a map of his new find. So as he sat up there on the mountain and had a better view of the valley and everything, he jotted down all the details he could and drew a map, and he looked down in Death Valley in amazement, and then he saw water flowing across the land that he just came from. So as he looked over this valley below him, he saw trees, he saw water. This water was making waves, and he had to snap himself back to reality because he realized it was a desert mirage, and that many people have died trying to reach a mirage, trying to reach this water that always seems to be a little ways further ahead. So at this point, he continued into the Funeral Range behind him, and he managed to go a couple more miles when he came across a deep canyon below. And he looked into the canyon, and he saw some doves and some other flocks of small birds flying from this canyon. So he knew that these smaller birds were more likely to be very near a water source, as they could not go the long distances that eagles or condors could go between drinking. So he carefully climbed down into this canyon with his pack animal, and he eventually reached the bottom, and he continued along the canyon floor, and eventually he came to a large tank after walking a mile or so. And a tank is a water-filled depression, and it was surrounded by thousands of quail and doves and lots of birds, and there was also a sandy shelf near the tank. So Jones decided that this would be a perfect spot to bed down for the night. He had water nearby, and then Jones debated whether to hunt some of the birds or just eat some of his jerky. Obviously, it sounds like there were lots of birds there, but he couldn't bring himself to eat any of the birds as he felt that they had led him to his salvation, and he chose to eat some of the jerky instead since he had plenty of jerky with him too, and he felt like these birds had saved him. So in the morning, Jones made breakfast and he filled his canteen full of water and he headed towards the east side of the funeral range. So he made himself, I guess, got himself down into the valley on the east side, and then he went into the Amargosa range, and then he made it to the Amargosa River, where he camped for the night, and of course, I guess, had water at this location again, too. So he was doing okay at this point. From here, he was said to head to Charleston Mountain, then Good Springs, then Crescent, and then he made his way into Searchlight. And at Searchlight, he went to the assayer to determine how rich his ore was. And they crushed 1 pound of his ore, and they determined that it ran over $40,000 per ton. And of course, this is from 1902. So Jones was ecstatic at this point. He had another 9 pounds, and they ground up. It sounds like they ground up almost all of it. He might have kept a few specimens just to be able to show people. But he cashed in pretty much the rest of his ore. He cashed it in for $180. And then he went to see a well-known gentleman in the area named Winfield Sherman. And from Sherman, he bought 3 burros for his return to his claim. And he also bought a lot of the other supplies that he would need, including food and provisions and mining tools and other things that he would need. And then he wrote to his sister out east and gave her all of the details. He told her all about his discovery and laid out as many details as he could, and told her he was about to make a return trip and probably the path that he was going to take. And then Jones, while he was in Searchlight, he had also been eating at an acquaintance, Jack Wheatley's eating house. And he had showed him some of the ore either before he cashed it in or because he kept a few samples for himself. But he showed his friend Jack the ore, and he also told him the story of his find and all of those details. So this gentleman Jack knew about it, and Alkali Jones's sister had a lot of the details also. And 3 days later, Alkali Jones, he loaded up 2 of his pack animals with his supplies, and he hopped onto the 3rd burro or pack animal, and he headed west towards Crescent Peak. None of his friends in Searchlight ever saw him again. Eventually, his sister came to look for him and try to retrace his path. He had been seen passing the gold mine on Crescent Peak, which isn't too far from Searchlight, and then he had been seen near Good Springs a few days later. Then the trail pretty much went cold as he headed into Death Valley. A few years later, a couple of old Shoshone Native Americans found the scattered bones and remnants of a small pack outfit. So it sounded like 2 or 3 pack animals with bones scattered about under a mesquite tree. And these bones were just the bones of the pack animals. There were no human bones in those. So it was thought that it was likely Alkali Jones's outfit, and that maybe he ran out of water here and he tied up the burros underneath the mesquite tree so that they would have some shade and he didn't lose them. And it was thought that he tried to make it to the little tank in the mountains or in that canyon when he may have ran completely out of water and succumbed to the elements somewhere in the eastern flank of the Funeral Mountains. Jones was never heard from again, and as far as his discovery, it was never found again either. But one thing to keep in mind is that when those brutal desert winds and storms come through, they can pile up sand and they can cover these areas in feet of sand. And they can just as easily take away a lot of sand too, which, that could have been the case. That might have happened when Alkali Jones was coming through that really bad sandstorm. Maybe a lot of sand on the side of that butte was being pulled away and revealed this vein of gold there, or gold-filled quartz. So anyhow, that could have been the case, and another sandstorm or just the gradual winds and sands could have piled up, and it could have covered up his find to not be found again. And it sounds like it was definitely in a very desolate area of Death Valley, and still very few people are in Death Valley. There probably were more people in the back areas of Death Valley in the old prospector days than there have been in the last, quite a few decades. So it's very possible that Alkali Jones gold vein could be somewhere still in Death Valley, in the side of a little small butte. It could be covered by sand half of the time, especially if the vein did go into the desert floor. Obviously, some of these sand dunes and stuff can get piled up pretty high from the desert floor or against the rocks. So that is the story of Alkali Jones. We don't know what happened to him, and his discovery could very well still be out there. It could be someday someone will find his, like a stacked rock monument or something like that, with his little tobacco tin in there and his signed papers and his claim. So if you have any thoughts or anything, you can leave them in the comments. Thanks for listening.